Imagine leading teams across continents, driving productivity and crafting groundbreaking strategies, all from your home office. Shane Spraggs has not only made this his reality, but has mastered it. As the CEO of Virtira, a best selling author and a visionary business strategist, Shane has spent over 25 years revolutionizing remote work. From steering major projects at Disney to co authoring The Power of Remote, his insights into productivity and team management are transforming how businesses operate globally. Join us as we dive into Shane's journey of pushing the boundaries of remote work and uncovering the secrets of thriving in today's dynamic work environment. I'm your host, Ash, and this is a show where I interview proven founders and industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights to help you build, launch, and grow your business. I hope you enjoy the show. Shane, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Ash.
Great, great. Do you have a favorite quote, something that inspires or motivates you that you would like to share with our audience?
One of my go-tos is have conversations today for the arguments you're going to have for tomorrow. I don't even know where I learned this quote, but it's something that I've brought up time and time again whenever I mentor somebody, whenever I teach a class. It's to remind people that a little prep can go a long way. A lot of the challenges we have with work are the expectations we set. And if you can set those expectations properly, especially with people, the ones who cause all the problems in projects and work, then you can resolve the arguments you're going to have tomorrow. So have the conversations today for the arguments you're going to have tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I always remember, and I can relate to this because I always remember this thing what my mom says that, if you're going for a presentation or a meeting, always try to like navigate through it a day before, a couple of days, because basically the way, because she's not she her first language is not English, so she speaks with me in her own language and try to explain, like, if you manifest the whole meeting a day before, then you
Yeah.
might be able to like figure out things where you need more preparation or not. So yeah, I can relate to that. Great stuff. So tell us about, Richard, what sort of product it is or service it is, and who is it for, and what's the main problem you're trying to solve.
Well, at its roots, Vertier is a productivity company. We hire people to help large multinationals reduce the complexities of their day-to-day work by bringing people who work remotely from
Mhm.
all over the world into these companies to do the type of work that maybe So the best example is salespeople. We work with sales teams, and you know they hire people. Companies hire sales experts to do the selling or the business development, but they often also saddle them with a ton of other extra responsibilities around operations. Keeping track of things, being on time, organizing their day, and these extra tasks get in the way of them being successful in the skill they're actually good at. So we've been doing that for many years, and at the start of the pandemic, we were already remote, and we decided that, given our experience, we put it into a book. So we wrote the Power of Remote, myself and Cynthia Watson, who is the owner of the company. Um, we put together our best experiences of working remotely, and as books do, it was a little bit late getting out. It took a little longer
Mhm.
than expected, and unfortunately, it came out in February 2023, which is around the time the Return to Office came out. Um, and as the mandates started happening and people started to push back on it, we found that the actual book had some more relevance 6 or 7 months later, when people started really pushing back to return to the office and say, you know what, there's something to this remote work stuff, and so we've leaned into that as well, helping businesses uh, improve their remote work and hybrid work experiences. It's not so much remote; it's distributed work. I mean,
Mm.
companies have been working distributed for years, and I've heard countless stories of people who've been forced back to the office only to work remotely from the office with the people.
Mm.
They have teams, all across the globe, and it's not uncommon for enterprise company these days to create a team full of people and expertise, that's miles apart.
Got it. Got it. So, how do you? I know this from my personal experience that leadership or managers or senior managers, they're the most difficult people to convince about anything.
Yes.
Anything. If you want them to introduce a change into their pipeline, if you want to get a new HR system in place, anything you want to introduce in the organization or in their life from a work perspective, it is super difficult. How do
Yeah.
you manage to convince them? Because it seems like, it's the hardest job you're doing for like the whole organization.
Yeah. And let me just start by saying that managers. Uh, this is going to sound bad, but I pin the responsibility on them for successful, thriving remote businesses. And the challenge there is that a lot of managers just don't get the training required to be good at their job. And we had a problem with good management before the pandemic, and now we're asking managers to do their job or learn their craft without being able to see or touch their staff. And that causes a huge issue. The typical manager, in the office would, manage off the side of their desk. They would do their performance reviews, based on the last 2 weeks worth of experience with an employee, and they just sort of survived. And to be successful remotely, you have to be good at managing. Um, Now, to get a manager to change their mind requires some basic change management skills. You have to establish a future point, like, hey, here's where we want to go to. Understand where we're at now. Make some minor incremental changes. Check in on them occasionally, and then monitor progress. The biggest thing for me is to make sure that you don't give them the sense that it's a one-way street. You don't want to do the command and conquer. We're going to do this, or it's my way or the highway. Obviously, it's best if you can get them to think it's their idea, and I'll touch on that in a second. But I like to give people, hey, we're going to revisit this in 3 months and see how it's going,
Mm,
or we're just going to try this one thing, and then I'll talk about it with you next week. And if it's not working, we'll change it. In my experience, when you set that time to review what the change is in the maybe a month's time, you might have you might change a small portion of it, but you never revert 100% of the change. They've learned
mm,
something in the process, and that's really what you want them to do. You want a lot of management and a lot of professional skills require a bit of faith, and that it's going to work, especially when you work with people, and they need an opportunity to see that's working. The other side of
mm,
things is if you can get them to learn for themselves how to make the change. And one of the things that I've found that's been very successful is retrospectives. These have been classic in software development teams for years, and they're only now starting to become more popular in business settings and professional, uh, you know, business settings. And the a retrospective is very simple. You get your team together, you everyone writes down a bunch of ideas that they want to start, stop, or continue doing, and then you write all those ideas onto a board or into a digital whiteboard like Miro, in the first 5 minutes, and that essentially creates the agenda for the meeting. But it's really powerful because since people are writing their ideas down and someone else is facilitating it, it breaks the ice on some of these tough topics. And so
mm,
if you can get an external facilitator, so I might help a manager on my team facilitate a meeting with their team, and they can get the feedback directly from their team in a way that's less combative, uh, less it creates less issues, and the manager then can get this big swath of feedback that they can pick and choose and things to work on, and it opens the conversation up to have a good chat about it.
right. And the retrospective you're talking about, is it the ceremonies we follow in a Scrum framework? Is it similar to that,
It
or is it
absolutely is,
different?
yeah. So
It
a
is.
typical
Yeah.
Scrum team will do one of these every 2 weeks, and the real purpose of it from a agile purist perspective, of course, is to make these small minor course corrections in a team. But outside of technology, they have a great purpose, and if you can sit down with your team and your manager on that team to run one. A lot of teams haven't sat down and talked about how they run for years. They go a long period of time without asking them the question, how can we do this better? And I find that the first one you do usually offloads a ton of ideas, a lot of which you could never implement in more than in a year's time. And then as you do them more and more frequently, you start to refine and get closer. But it's an opportunity if you're a good facilitator to maybe throw a few ideas in the right direction. And once they can learn for themselves, it's much more easy to get the change through.
Got it, got it. And I want to learn more about the methodologies. But before going into that, tell us when you decide. So is it just you and your partner who decided to start this service, or there were more people involved? And then when you decided to do it, did you look into the market where there are other products or services? What was going on that time, and what did actually you see from your research that encouraged you to move ahead with this idea?
Well, again, we looked into this right in the middle of the pandemic, so at the time it was very relevant. And we started writing this at the start of the 2020, and at the time, companies were very much in the noob phase of doing this, and a lot of them needed help. Um, we had anticipated the book would take about a year to make, and then it took two and a half, and of course it came out at a time when people had already rejected remote work for that time. So in terms of, this is a classic challenge with businesses, right? You start a new business, things take longer than you expect, and then you have to adapt and pivot. And so we pivoted to telling people more about distributed teams and more about hybrid teams, which of course is the same techniques, a lot of the similar challenges. And we'd been working with distributed teams for years, and the market, probably in September, October last year, changed considerably because of the return to office mandate started failing.
Got it, got it. And can you give us our listeners, and I want to jump into the methodology section now, but before jumping onto that, can you give us our listeners an understanding of the size of the business, where you are in terms of number of customers, size of team, etc.?
Right. Yeah. We're a relatively small team. We are based out of a small town called Chester, Nova Scotia. Real good example of a distributed team. It's only set up there because that's where Cynthia had her roots when we first started. But a lot of the team is spread all across Canada. We tend to hire people from remote rural areas. We're around, I think we're around 30 people at this point, and the types of customers we work with are Cisco and Dell and a few other larger enterprise businesses who, it's a very specialized business, but we help them on a case by case basis.
Got it, got it. Great. So let's get back to the methodology then. With remote project management requiring a distinct approach, I guess, what tools or methodologies have you found to be most effective?
As usual, the most boring things are usually the things you need to do, and when it comes to remote project management, one of the keys is to start tracking action items. The People don't like to do it. It feels like too oppressive. But what one of the things we find is that, so an action item is, you'll be in a meeting with somebody, and you have a task that needs to be done, and someone says, okay, well, I'll give you that file in order to help you finish your task. That isn't necessarily a task, it's an action item. Someone who had made a commitment to do something to help you with your task, or vice
Mm.
versa. um, and what we find is remotely, these people tend to forget. These tasks tend to not to be completed uh, uh, as often as they should. Um, and and by the time you're into your third or fourth meeting of the day, it's pretty tough to remember what your first meeting was like. So the goal is to try to help people remember what these commitments were, and these commitments are also the fabric of a project. Without these things happening, stuff doesn't move forward at the right pace. And so we're strong believers in maintaining a complete log of all action items, and it feels over overwork. You would never do this in the office. You would expect that if someone said, "Hey, I'll deliver that file for you," you'd watch them write it down on a piece of paper in front of them, or they write it in their notes, and you'd expect them to take that on because people are responsible with these things. But one of the rules we follow is never assume people are going to follow through on their commitments. And if you take that rule to heart and you start recording all these action items, then you have a way for you to keep on top of them. And if that person does eventually deliver that file to that person, they can close their task and move on to something else. And it just helps productivity all in all. Now, most people don't like to hear this because it feels arduous to keep track of all these action items, but you can make that part of the process where you have maybe your project meeting, you go through, you listen to what everyone has to say, you keep track of the action items, and then the next one you maybe open your project meeting up by going through the action items people had before. But we would actually push that to be um, follow up more frequently. We have a process called days of the week, where every day of the week has a important step you take. And on Monday, you share with the individuals, hey, you have these action items this week. Tuesday, Wednesday, you follow up with them. On Thursday, you identify any risks to someone who's not going to get them done. And then on Friday, you share publicly the list of all the action items on the team. And sadly, it's also takes advantage of public shaming a little bit because people will make commitments to other individuals, and then they get on Friday they get told that people get told that they didn't follow through. And so it's a bit of a motivator, a bit of a psychological approach to things. But the daily follow up on these action items means your team can continue to function, and it gives you back control. It doesn't leave you know these action items to chance. And I know there'll be people on your listeners who will feel like that's micromanagement. Um, but the reality is remotely people are distracted. People aren't paying attention, and people forget what the commitments they made.
No, I totally agree with you on this because back in the Microsoft days, I coined a term called Scrum with triggers. So I was looking at a program. I was looking after 12 Scrum teams on the floor, and in our Scrum of Scrum stand-ups, what used to come to me is like, um, even though you have a user story assigned to a person, it's difficult for that person to go back to your Jira or DevOps and update it because developers tend to think that it's a waste of time
Yeah,
because they expect the Scrum Master to do that. So I created these workshops for each team where I went there myself, did this small presentation, and we introduced this small widget which was like into the DevOps. It literally does one thing. Before 3 days of the deadline, it triggers you once. 2 days, it triggers you once, and the same day, it triggers you 3 times. So
okay,
when you get these triggers, and everybody was mandatory to allow these triggers on their browser, like because we were using DevOps on the browser.
yeah,
So they used to get these annoying pop-ups, and then because these triggers were annoying, they started doing it. And
yeah,
the beauty was about these triggers is if you do it, it doesn't come.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely.
So when I coined this term, this become very famous. But then what happened is really got annoying at a later stage. So we stopped doing it. But yeah, I totally get the space where you guys are operating right now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and
that's it. Sorry, go on.
yeah, and the thing is that and you're absolutely right that you take someone who's a good software developer, and
Mhm.
they're good at doing software development, but there's a lot of business skills they need in order to be a good employee, a good
Mhm.
team member. Things like time management, right?
Yeah.
Things like the ability to take a larger task and break it out up into smaller pieces. And at a certain level, you have to understand your team and where they're at with those business skills and meet them where they're at. And so, in a small team, this days of the week stuff can usually be done by the scrum master or a project manager, depending on how you have your business organized. On a larger team, it can be a separate role. If you have a lot of people involved, maybe you have a bunch of teams, and that's where we come in. We help a team facilitate the work so that things aren't lost. People follow up on their work, and work just gets done, and it really supercharges the productivity of the team because all those little commitments are being worked on, and it gives people the ability to learn as well that, hey, I'm making a commitment. I got to follow up on this. Otherwise, I'm going to be publicly shamed on Friday for not doing it. Very
Mm,
similar to what you're saying on your triggers.
mm. So, in another boring question, but I think it's very important for people, especially people who are listening to our podcast, because most of them are leaders, founders. They're trying to make the wheel of make the engine work together in their organization. How do agile management principles play a role in enhancing remote work environment? That's the one part of it. And then the second part is how, in terms of leadership within the remote setting, what strategies do you recommend for maintaining the team cohesion and
Yeah,
motivation from afar?
that was a great question, and I take a lot of the approaches to remote work from my experience as an agile practitioner. The the, the way you organize your information, you instead of tasks, it's more story based. What value are you assigning people to complete? So when they finish that work, it adds to the project, or in a business that doesn't, it maybe is in software development. Um, how is that contributing to the strategy that year? So I like to think of it as, company might have long-term plans. Those theoretically get broken down on a yearly basis to yearly priorities, or however you call them, OKRs. Those get broken down into theoretically the projects and tasks that are going to go into completing them. And every everything that people everything people are assigned should be going towards either creating value for a customer, through sales, production or customer service, or accomplishing one of these, long-term plans or goals or priorities of the business to grow and company forward. So for me, that's the first thing, is to look at things, the work they're doing, not just as go from here to there and do that thing. It's, this is, if you do that, this is going to accomplish something that's meaningful, and that has knock-on value to the employee, because now they can, we can celebrate the fact that they contributed. They can feel good about themselves. They get a sense of pride in their work, and they understand how they fit into the long term. I'm also a big proponent on the 2 week sprint. I long believe that people as a animal, they can't they can't see past 2 weeks when it comes to scheduled work.
Mm,
People have, if it's this week, they rush it. They put everything aside to do it. If it's 3 weeks or more, they think they have too much time for it.
yeah.
I'll get to it, right? 2 weeks, I like to say, can they see next Friday, right? So next Friday is the ultimate due date for anything you should have on your team, and any outside that is just, it's too far on. So always think in terms of, what are people working on today.
Mm,
Then Agile does a great job of assigning accountability to the work and giving people the chance to be proud of the work that they're doing. And so this leads into the other part. And from a leadership standpoint, I'm a big proponent on psychological safety on a team. And what psychological safety is the sense that they can speak up without feeling reprisal for anything. So I say something negative towards the work that's being done. I feel free to do that, as opposed to feeling that if I say something, I'm going to get, it's going to affect my advancement in the company or my position in the company,
mhm,
and or the and so developing psychological safety requires a lot of work and a lot of emotional intelligence by the leader. So they need to, first of all, be able to admit their own mistakes, and when you could admit your own mistakes into your team, they start to feel they're able to admit their own mistakes. Starting to value failure over success, because if you value failure, you learn from it, and so learning from failure, creating a learning environment, and then giving people a chance to try things and letting them fail, right? So, and then once you've done that, and then you create a team who can be far more self-sufficient, and you just help them move along. You help them, you support them, as opposed to them, as opposed to you having to drag them through the work. So, those, psychological safety is probably one of the key things to being a successful remote manager.
Got it. Got it. So Shane, would you be able to share a compelling case study that highlights how an organization leveraged the solution or the tactics to achieve the success and solve their key business challenge in terms of remote workforce management? I would like to hear about the specific problem they faced and the steps taken to implement your solution, and then the measurable outcome they experience as a result.
Good. Yeah. So I've chatted to a number of businesses over the last year. We ran these for a while. We were running these things called the uh, remote readiness assessments, and helping people identify where they were on a scale, and it helped them really clarify the areas that they have challenges with. We had this one particular client. I won't share their names, but it was really clear that they had some challenges with management, and we identified some very key steps. Things from everything from making sure they had the right cadence for their one-on-ones, to making sure they had the right reporting and tracking. And this is not project management, not software development. It's traditional business management. So there's business projects, and helping them really put a scope around it. And what we saw over the course of several months, that we saw that managers started doing a better job managing their teams. People started having a better understanding of their role in the team. And we use a system called the uh, NPS survey. So NPS is Net Promoter Score, and you do an Employee Net Promoter Score. And so what we do is we do an Employee Net Promoter Score at the start of these engagements, and it will show how likely people are likely to refer a friend or a family member to a job at this business. And it's a really good way to not just measure how people are feeling towards the business, but also how the levels of trust are. And we saw over the course of the 6 months, it go from a very low score to a much higher score, as people started feeling far more engaged with the work,
Mhm.
and far more value getting back to them. So there's a lot of things to improve, and we just sort of took a list and we went through from the top down, starting mostly with their management team, to help them understand how they contribute to the overall process in the company.
Got it. Got it. And is there an example you can share with our listeners where you were engaged with a customer to solve their problems, but you kind of like, I don't want to say that you made a mistake. It just happened, or a setback happened.
Yeah,
And then how do you do navigate through it? And then what advice would you give our listener based on this experience?
sure. Yeah, like we were mentioning talking about earlier, a lot of this comes down to trust, right, and faith. That is,
Mhm.
you know, it's hard for someone who's never witnessed a high performing team to understand what a high performing team looks like.
Mm.
And so you can get pushback from managers and leaders who have a sense of belief that people need to be in the office to be creative, right? And it may be true for some people. One of the things I quite often say is that remote work's not for everybody. You have some individuals who thrive in it, and some people who would be better off in an office. And when that person is a leader, it's really hard to change their mind. And so we have had situations where, despite our efforts, we were unable to convince those individuals who really make the big decisions around how things run. And when it comes down to a single decision around, are you in the office or not, and that decision is held by someone who believes that people should be in the office, um, it's quite tough to change their mind.
Yeah, yeah, totally get that. Cool, perfect. So we are reaching towards the end of our interview. Shane, I want to ask you a personal question. It's nothing related to your experience, or it might have an overlap of it. Throughout your journey, and experience, there must have been some valuable lessons learned, right? If you don't mind sharing, could you reflect on your experience and tell our listeners about a regret you have, which encountered during the journey, and you thought that if I have done it this way, it could have been better. So that way, like, our listeners have that, okay, if we are going to get this job done, then, oh, I have heard this episode on Founders Podcast where Shane Sprague was speaking around the team management.
Yeah.
He has done this mistake, but then he mentioned that, okay, this is how he fixed it, or navigated through it. And then, based on that, how did you resolve that challenge?
Okay. See if I can think of a good one here. There's obviously been many. I like the analogy that you see some famous sports players, and they don't score all the time. They make mistakes. They miss the buzzer at the last minute as well.
Mm,
For me, I can think of a couple that were really difficult. From a yeah, here's one from a business standpoint.
mhm,
One of the first businesses I started, um, we I was started with a few other partners who just enjoyed the work. We just really enjoyed doing the work, and it we never tackled the issue around why we were in business, who our customer was, and what our market segment was.
mm,
So we were successful despite that for quite a while, and then we saw other competitors coming in and taking chunks of our pie, as you might say, right? So we'd see a competitor come in, and they were focused on a particular type of client. Can we do that work? Yeah, absolutely, we can do that work. We also do this work and that work and that work and that work. So this one company would come in, and they took all this type of client away from us, and they did a great job. And we carried on. Another client come, other types of competitor comes, takes another whole client away, and so it became very clear that because we didn't have a clear focus, we were rudderless. And
mm,
I eventually ended up leaving the company before they found their direction, but they found it eventually. And once they found that approach, the things that they wanted to lean into, it significantly boosted their success and direction for the business. And that's stayed with me ever since. I'm very keen on understanding, you know, what's the market you're in, why are you in business, who are your customers, because it matters, and it gives you some direction on how to do your business. So if you don't know who your customers are, it becomes very tough to go find them, right?
mm,
If your whole approach is to build a website and they're going to find you, well, that hasn't worked in 20 years, right? So marketing becomes very difficult because you have the wrong messaging to the people who might work with you. You can't bring up a list of clients you can go after and do direct sales with. But yet, so many companies have a great idea and they just try to do it, and they don't go anywhere because they don't realize that they have to fit in to the bigger picture in order to be successful.
yeah. So the advice here is to basically define your ideal customer persona before you jump onto the horse of starting the
Yeah,
business.
it's again, when you're first starting, it's the boring stuff. People don't
Mm,
want to spend time talking about, what's our purpose, let's just get the work done.
yeah.
We have this money right in front of us. It just need to finish this project. Let's do it. And taking an hour or two to have those conversations feels like a interruption, a delay, and it's not going to pay you out. But when you can, when you start hiring people, you need to be able to tell them why you're in business because they want to join the team. When you start looking for new customers, you have to understand which ones are, and it's in so many business books, but it's the thing I see people overlook nonstop and constantly. And it just takes a little bit of work to align where you're at. And it goes back to have the conversations today for the arguments you're going to have tomorrow.
Got it. Cool. So let's go into our lightning round. I've got 6 quick fire questions for you.
Sure.
Um, so you can answer them as quickly as you can. You ready?
Sure.
Great. What are the top 3 strategies in 2024 to manage remote teams?
Okay. Top three strategies. Okay, let's start with we talked about a bunch of them already, but uh, delegate work so that people understand where point A and point B are. I could probably take a lot of time on this, but point A and point B, and let them discover the journey between them. So don't tell them how to get between point A and point B, and then manage. Ask them how long it's going to take them to do the work. Help them discover a time that both challenges them, but it's not too lenient or too difficult, and let them do the work and let them win from them. The next one that I learned far too late in my career was just because someone completes work that you feel is routine doesn't mean it isn't routine for them. So praise people for the work that they finish, and ask them, hey, what does this mean to you for you to finish this work? And I'll just go back to the last one I said earlier. Psychological safety. It's absolutely critical in remote teams to create a environment where people feel they can be successful and take ownership of the work they do. It just it 5x's the team uh, to want to get the work done and to contribute with you.
Got it. What book would you recommend to our audience and why, other than The Power of
Yeah,
Remote?
the go-to book for me, is, other than Power of Remote, yeah, is Eric Ries's The Lean Startup. I read
Please.
that when actually I had a chance encounter where he came around to my hometown here, and I went and saw him present while he was on his pre-book tour. I had no idea who he was, and his presentation blew me away. And his book really gives you the basics around, hey, go get someone to pay for your service before you put too much work into it to prove
Mm,
that they are. And that's kind of a lot of lean and agile principles marry each other. And I think that's a. And then his follow-up book, the lean accounting stuff he presents in the startup way, are, I know that's 2 books and probably cheating, but they're both incredible approaches to starting a business.
awesome. What one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful project manager or manager?
It comes down to working with people. The ability to listen to individuals. Actually, active listening is probably a big. There's tons of characteristics, but the ability to work with people far outweighs the ability the need for you to be organized and to be to keep track of things. If you can work with people, you can survive a project.
Cool. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
I think my favorite one is probably, this is like many people, I write stuff down.
Yeah.
I one of the reasons I got into project management is I've got a terrible memory, and I just know that about myself. And as soon as you admit that you can't remember stuff and you write everything down, then it becomes a bit of a superpower because you have it on your hand. And so I use a tool that there's many of them out there. My go-to is called Simple Note, and it is available on all of my devices, and it uses the cloud, so it's always the same regardless of what I'm on. And whenever something comes up, I type in it, and I probably have far too much junk in there. I need to go back and clean it up, but it has all my thoughts and ideas for years now. So it's that's my go-to. And there's tons of note type tools that you know based on the original Evernote, but yeah, keep it.
Cool. Yeah, I myself use a physical notebook most of the time, as
I
much as.
would, but I can't read my own writing. Like, years of
Ah,
typing on a keyboard prevented me
that,
from. Yeah, so plus you can't keep the book with you everywhere you go. So I can
yeah,
I can
yeah,
write a
that,
note when I'm out,
yeah.
out in the shopping or yeah.
Cool. What's a new or a crazy business idea you would like to pursue if you had time?
Oof. Whew, that's an interesting one. Um, I have to think about this. I heard. Let's see. This is a bit out of the blue, but I heard there's a massive market in reselling Lego. So
Hmm,
I like the idea. Someone was saying that they can make a lot of money off of buying and selling Lego, and I'm a big Lego fanatic, so yeah, it'd be interesting to give that a try.
cool. What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Whew. Well, the people that know me probably they know me, but I play harmonica, so I'm a big. I sing in a band and play harmonica, and been doing it for
Mm,
years, and I think I'm pretty good at it.
awesome. I would love to attend one of your concerts. Great, great. Shane, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story and unpacking your last years of your business. If people want to check out or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
Just find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Shane Spraggs there. So just type in my name, I'll show up, and yeah, reach out.
Cool. Shane, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your inspiring journey and impactful work you're doing in project management space. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Founders Podcast.
Thanks, Ash. It's been a pleasure as well.
Great. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of Founders Podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Shane insightful and inspiring. Make sure you go on LinkedIn, search for Shane Spraggs, connect with him, ask your questions related to your team dynamics, etc. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and stay updated on our future interviews. Stay inspired, stay motivated, and keep building.